Hello everyone, today we are taking a look at the Starship X1 from YMZ FPV. This one does come with Express LRS or TBS Crossfire as your receiver options. In my particular case, I have the 03. This was sent to me for review without the 03, so I added my own. You can buy one the same way. Also note that pretty much all of our drone manufacturers in China are going on holiday on February 4th. They may start a day early. I believe they're back on like the 18th or the 20th. So if you place an order, know there'll be a delay before it's actually processed. And if you happen to place an order right before they go on holiday, there may also be a delay. The flight controller is the HackRC 7226 all-in-one, and that is 2 to 6S compatible, and it is 40 amp. I did find in order to connect USB, I had to remove this rear metal piece in order to get my USB cable connected in there. A little bit disappointing and kind of a pain in the tuchus. More on that later. Motors are the RCM Power 1303 6000 kV, so it runs 4S. Props on the motor are the Gemfan 2023 tri-bladed props. The prop protection is carbon fiber, and it looks to be about 3 millimeters thick or pretty close. And the bottom plate where the motors and everything else are mounted looks to be about the same. Motor post to motor post, it looks to be about 103 millimeters. Plenty of space inside if you wanted to go with HD0 or walk snail for your video system. But camera mounting is made for the DJI-03, so you might have some adaptation to make there. These plates up front are aluminum, and so are these rear components. Comes with an extra set of props. 2 3D prints that you can mount to the top plate. I found them a bit tedious and really limits your battery options, so I went with the 2 included battery straps, but I added the rubber pads to the top. Comes with 2 tiny screwdriver. One is a hex head and one is a Phillips head. Also comes with 2 sheets of stickers. This little chunker weighs 154 grams. I flew it mainly on the 650 and 850 milliamp 4S G&B batteries, but I did test 2 others. Notice the different shape. These do not hold their voltage under performance situations nearly as well. That's why I mainly flew the larger batteries, which are heavier. So depending upon what you're shooting for, you may want to try these batteries, or whatever you have on hand. With the 650 milliamp 4S G&B battery, it weighs 223.85 grams. With the G&B 850 milliamp 4S battery, it weighs 41.46 grams. With the G&B 720 milliamp 4S battery, it weighs 222.61 grams. And last but not least, with the G&B 660 milliamp 4S battery, it weighs 217.79 grams. While it doesn't come with a mount for an external HD camera, we do have these 4 posts up here, which we could DIY and 3D print our own mount, but currently I don't see one available. Okay, we're going to go right into the faster flights, which is my more preferred way of flying, although I don't have a problem with exploratory. It's just not something I do a lot. I do for testing purposes, and we will see slower cinematic exploratory sort of footage later on in the video. But I'm going to show you 2 of this sort of flight style. So I started flying this clear back. It was right around Christmas time. I can't remember if it was before Christmas or right before the New Year. But then my weather turned south, as it did for a lot of us here in the Midwest U.S. We started getting snow, and then we got some really cold days. Matter of fact, it had like a 2.5-week spell where we were having single-digit temperatures, all the way down to -9, I think I saw for my local area. And then with the winds, the feels like, or the index was clear down to, -20, -30 on some of those days. And then here most recently, we had a nice little warming spell, which helped to melt off the snow, as you can see here. And we also had rain during the first part of the warming spell. So speaking of weather, 57 degrees on this day, 9-mile-an-hour winds. Those winds do have gusts that come up to 13 miles an hour, and you may hear that as we have a neighbor's tree that still has some leaves, so you may hear that in my flight audio. The flight audio is not recorded on the drone. It is recorded with a secondary camera sitting on the table. That is the pilot audio, I oftentimes refer to it as, so you can get an idea of what it sounds like in my space at that distance. So 2-inch and a cinematic sort of a quad flying this way. It's not really what we typically think of for design, but I thought it handled it pretty well. I thought the tune of it tracked well. I really didn't have any problems with it. I don't get terribly fussy about the tune, as long as we don't have really the deficiencies of bounce back, or we don't have a lot of oscillations or shudders. As long as the flight is smooth and controllable, and I can do the slow flight as well as the faster flights with quads, I'm generally pretty happy. I'm not going to complain or make a big point about the PID tune unless it's really good, because for the most part, when it comes to our tunes nowadays, they're all pretty good. And the reason why I'm using this particular flight is I have that relatively minor crash. You know, I just didn't pull out quite in time, but I have one here at the end when the flight should have already ended. That was pretty dramatic. After this, I'll show you a flight on an 850 milliamp, which is a big battery for a 2-inch prop. But I think, you know, if you're looking at this and you're looking at the longer flight times, 850 would probably be what I recommend. I'm not saying you can't get longer flight times with a bigger battery, but there's always battery weight and diminishing return issues. But here we go, that punch out, and I come out, and smacked right into the bricks on the fire pit that we have over there. So that was a pretty harsh crash. Very, very minor damage, and we'll look at that back at the desk. Those with eagle eyes may have already seen it. And you see the flight ended. My battery is just screaming way down there at 3.14 volts per cell. Flight time of 243. Probably should have ended that closer to 230. And here we are. This is the 850 milliamp 4S battery. Again, the one with the flower print on it, the more rectangular shape, less flat and long like the 720 and the 660 batteries. These batteries just hold voltage better, but this flight, while I still have a crash in it, I thought this was also of value to be able to show you how it flies with a heavier battery on it, and the fact that it still comes in under 250 grams if that's a weight that you're shooting for those regulations that we have. So kind of value in both particular ways. Now obviously with this weight of battery, it does require you to compensate. You know, it's not an analog super light 30, 40 gram 2-inch build like my Rocket Race. This is obviously much, much heavier. We could do ourselves some favors by going with either an alternate HD video system that's lighter or decasing this 03. Of course, if you decase and mounting is going to be kind of up to yourself, DIY sort of stuff, but if you're up for that, it is an option that is going to enhance performance as well as flight time. That's the crash in this 850 milliamp. Not a big deal. You know, I didn't smack into anything immovable. Just got too low and got tripped up in the grass. Pretty minor sort of stuff. But I was speaking about having to compensate for the additional weight. You're going to need to use more throttle. You're going to need to use more roll and pitch and yaw. All our sticks commands to compensate for the battery, which you can definitely, obviously do it and still have a pretty fun flight. It's just not going to perform as well as something else on a lighter setup, whether it's the HD video system or just generally a lighter quad on a 2-inch prop. That's just how it goes in when it comes to performance in FPV. Less weight gives us more agility and longer flight time. I think the biggest drawback is the USB port access, and that was something that, you know, to get it set up, I had to take the rear metal plate out, and then after the fact, and I was out flying it, I was like, oh, I need to change the battery voltage warning so it's not annoying us, because due to the power draw and battery testing, you know, we're going to get dipped down below 3.5 volts, but when we disarm, it'll pop back up, as typical in my videos. But because the USB port was such a pain to get to, I was like, all right, I'm not taking this thing apart in order to just change that value. We're going to have to just cope with the fact that we're going to get low battery warnings during the course of the tail end of these flights. So that's something, if you have one of these and you're setting it up, make sure you set your voltage about where you want it before, or understand that you're going to need to disassemble it again in order to get the battery voltage warning set where you want it to. I guess you could use the OSD too. That's something that I just rarely think about because I find that cumbersome to get into that. I think it's in there. I can't recall now. It's been so long since I used the OSD for that purpose that it's just quicker to go inside and plug into the Betaflight configurator on my computer and make that change. But you see during the course of both of these flights a number of little punch outs, some bigger punch outs, all sorts of cornering. I don't have the camera angle maxed, but it is pretty close to max. Again, we could take a finer look at that back at the desk. But it flies fine. It's not going to be a top performer, but you know, none of these Cinewhoops are going to be high performance. I think the Oddity RC Cinewhoops perform the best in my experience. You see, I've still gone too low on my battery, but not as bad. So about 320, 315 on the flight time with an 850 milliamp. Okay, this is our slower flight on the 850 milliamp G&B that I did show. My flight times for the smaller batteries, they're about 40 seconds to 55 seconds less than a comparative others. Like if you compare the 660 to the 650, G&B batteries, I got about 40 seconds less flight time in a slow cruisy flight, and then on the 720 I got about what I got on the 650. So you get about 40 more seconds comparison of the 650 milliamp G&B battery. And also, I did fly those, but I don't recall the flight time in a more aggressive flight. It's just that the low battery voltage warning was coming on so quickly because those batteries, they just don't hold their voltage as well as the bulkier, heavier ones. And when it comes to performance, especially in aggressive flight, I tend to go with the more traditional shaped battery rather than the flatter style of battery that I already showed in the video. So, you can use those batteries, and the 3D prints that are made for the top are for the 720 milliamp batteries, and they are really tight. So the two different components there that I found it was frustrating to get into the 3D prints, and when I did, I oftentimes ended up pulling one of the 3D prints off. So I went back to the straps in order to use the battery testing, and that was again clear back somewhere around Christmas time when I first started flying the Starship X1. This flight was actually about that time as well, because whenever I get a Cinewhoop, I do the slower sort of flight first so you can see how smooth the footage is. I should mention there is no ND filters. I don't use ND filters on the channel unless I'm specifically showing how the ND filter might help to correct something. No ND filter on this, no rock steady on this either. So no stabilization has been done. This is the video footage with straight out of the camera. In this particular case, the beginning part of this video is straight from the VTX, so you plug in the USB to get the video recording off. What you've seen in the faster flights is the goggle DVR, so that's recorded on the headset, which I am using the Goggles 2 from DJI. If you want to record the beta flight information, I believe you have to use the Goggles 2. I don't believe the V2 goggles do that. It's the Goggles 2 that do that. So the bigger Ant-Man style of goggles don't have the beta flight information recorded. I haven't tinkered with WTF OS on those goggles to know whether they will record the beta flight information or not, but any of those that are out there running that alternate firmware for the V2 goggles or the V1 goggles, please let me know. I think I've mentioned that before, but I haven't gotten an update. Taking a look at a branch that has been hanging up there for almost a year, and I keep wondering what day I'm going to be outside doing some lawn work and that branch is going to knock me on the head. I suppose at some point I probably should hire someone to come out and trim up my trees, give them a little bit more of an umbrella, and take care of that branch as well. I tried to reach it with my pole saw. I think it's a 16-foot pole saw. It's just too high. I can't get a hold of it, so it has remained up there at least for a year. Surprising enough, with all the snow that we got, it did not fall down. We had a lot of other branches that came down in those storms with the rain and the snow and the cold and the wind, but not that one. Okay, that's a pretty good look. Let's jump to the end just as a proof of concept for the flight time on this 850 milliamp battery. As you can see there, we're getting down below 3.5 volts, 3.4, and the voltage really starts to fall off, so you have to hustle in. So we kind of at the 3.9 when I was showing this, and then I come in and I disarm. Touch low on the battery, and you can see my storage is also full, but our flight time at 725 and the recovery voltage at 3.48 volts per cell. Okay, so I think this is the most serious damage from that crash that I had. Oddly enough, it's on the back, so it must have tumbled when I had to crash into the fire pit. It's a little bit, the carbon fiber has kind of flaked off or chipped off here on this rear end. These are like rubber pieces, and I think they go all the way through, but I can't like push them out, but it seems like because they're on both ends. I'm not, other than design, I don't see that they serve a purpose, but they are rubber. I can feel the texture difference, and they do seem to squeeze out a little bit. So if you had that question, I have answered that. You can see probably here where my most severe damage is. Right there. Hopefully you can make that out. So these are two separate pieces, and in one of my crashes I bent this piece up into the camera a little bit. You can see how it's actually touching the camera right there, and they're all scraped up. So that must have happened on my fire pit crash. Part of that brick got in there. Thankfully it didn't damage the camera, but it looks like I'm going to have to flatten that back out in order to get my camera angle back down. Speaking of camera angle, that's what I was flying at during those flights, and you can see I have a touch more room up here at the top, so you can get a couple more degrees if you wanted to readjust your camera angle to push it up even further. just using one screw to mount the camera, which is fine. You know, you saw the footage. These pieces are all metal, as I mentioned in the quick specs. Getting the O3 in here was a little bit of a challenge. So I ended up trimming the tubing off of my antenna and pushing this down so I'd have enough of the internal antenna wire to get into my O3. It does come with these little pieces here, but you can see my antennas come out of the bottom. Hopefully you can see that. But that's pretty much necessary in order to be able to access the USB port, which is right there, as well as the SD card. Mounting this the other way around, while it's probably possible, I just wasn't comfortable with it. And the antenna wires, you probably can't see them. They're down in there next to that capacitor, which it does have. They're fairly tight. So if you, I don't know, I think in my particular case, I would be more comfortable if I'd have trimmed a bit more of this tubing off in order to give me a little bit more antenna length between the tubing and mounting to the O3. It was, in my opinion, very tedious to mount my own O3. Of course, you know, you can buy it with your an O3 if you want to. If you don't want to, that's just a choice you're making. Also, I have a little blue zip tie. Hopefully you can see it right down in there. And I use that to just secure my camera cable so that it doesn't get out on the prop line. And then, oh, here's a better view of it right here. You can kind of see where I made some loops with the camera wire or MIPI cable, and then I zip tied it together. Not terrible tight, just snug enough to where I could be assured that it wasn't going to get out into the prop line. Additionally, you could probably cable that down to the bottom. As you can see here on the bottom, we don't have any feet or anything, so when you're landing, you're coming down onto the screws. Over time, of course, the screw heads will wear down. We see a few different button heads here on the front and rear that are kind of, they look like they're countersunk a little bit. No, I think they're all the same, actually. I don't think any of them are countersunk. Just an optical illusion as I'm looking through it. They've used motor wire tape, which I do approve of whenever you've got motor wire. I don't see that there's excess motor wire to where they would actually come up, so I don't think that's critical to your operation. It's possible if that tape isn't on there, you've got enough length between the ESC solder pads and the motor that it could come up to the prop line. But in the moment, I can't prove that. It just doesn't look like there's that much motor wire in there. We've got some metal tubes here and here and here and here. That just helps to solidify the prop protection down to the main frame. I do think there's an opportunity for them to turn this into an unprop protected quad, which will save some weight. I still think that they've added some weight because of their design choices and using these metal pieces, which gives them kind of a futuristic or Tesla sort of design with these angles and the fins and things of that nature. In this case, because it's running an O3, maybe it doesn't make a huge difference. Oh, that's right. They already have a 2-incher without prop protection that they came out with. Really, when it comes to a 2-inch prop, none of them, regardless of manufacturer or design, are going to be high performers when it comes to carrying the DJI-O3. The DJI-O3 is one of the heavier systems. Of course, you can nakedize them. You can take off the case and minimize that. You can take off the VTX case and minimize that. That'll decrease the weight. I think it's about 9 grams, which is substantial. But we have these metal pieces, which also increase the overall required weight. That could be changed by the use of slight redesign and using carbon fiber as the upright pieces rather than metal. I think the metal, it gives it a look and feel, but it does take away from the flight performance. So overall, I thought it flies well. They pretty much have to use a 4S battery on it to get the thrust that you'll need in order to carry all the weight that is this. It is interesting to see that they went with prop protection that was carbon fiber. We haven't seen that in a while. We've seen a lot of the plastics. Kind of gave that a little bit of a test with that fairly high velocity crash into the fire pit. And it held up just fine. So I don't really have a problem with that. Now, how much more aggressively can we crash it and it still handles that? Don't know, but hopefully that one crash with the audio helps kind of evaluate that on your own. The plastics that we've recently seen with Cinewhoops have held out in my flights, and we've been seeing that for, has it been about 1.5 years thereabouts? So it's interesting they went back to carbon fiber. Again, I don't know what the weight difference might be between something this size and the plastic version, carbon fiber versus plastic, but I think it's a possibility that the aerodynamics are an advantage when it comes to this because of the very low profile of the prop protection. Didn't see any wobbles or shakes or any oscillations when it came to my dives or really any quick maneuvers. I thought the PID tune was good. Again, I don't get terribly fussy about how good the PID tune is. That's very preferential as far as our personal experience and what we're looking for. But as long as I can do what I want to out of it, just to repeat myself, I'm okay with it. Plus, you get to decide what you think of the PID tune by watching the flight footage, which we've technically got 3 different flights over the course of... It's a shorter time period than my normal. I think it's about 5 days, maybe 7 days of flying this one. So I didn't get as many flights on this one as I might during the warmer months. During the warmer months when I fly quads, I'll oftentimes get 30 to 50 flights before I post the review. This one's probably closer to, maybe 17 or 18. Maybe closer to 20, but it might be closer to 15. I really didn't track it all that closely. I just know that I generally take 8 to 10 batteries out with me during every flight session, and I go through them all, whether that's lunchtime or what have you. So this should have at least 16 flights as far as the fast aggressive ones, but may have as many as 20, 22. That's about as best as I can do for you on the flight numbers on this particular quad. Again, they're having a holiday, as they do every year, starting February 4th. Should be back around the 18th to 20th. So you'll see processing orders and delays there until they get back and they get fully operational. But if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comment section below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.